Welcome, everyone. My name is Sarah Ray from the Bloomfield Public Library. Thank you for joining us tonight as we learn about chocolate from Victoria and Cocoa Beantown. I'm going to turn the mic over to you, Victoria.
All right. Hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for that introduction, Sarah. It's so nice to be connected to some folks in Connecticut since that is where I'm originally from. Um, Folks who are watching, if you feel comfortable turning your cameras on, it's really great to see faces. It makes it feel more like it's live. You're going to see my face most of the time today because I'm going to be acting like I'm standing in the room with you, holding things up. I'm not a big fan of digital slides. I grew up with Mr. Rogers, so I like when there's interaction, but a little bit about me. My name is Victoria. I'm from a company called Cocoa Beantown. We are a chocolate events and education company based in the Boston area. If you haven't heard of us before, it's about time you did. We're going to be turning 8 years old in September. We do chocolate tours, tasting events, educational programs like the one that you're about to engage in. And my official job title is something that you might not have heard of before. As a matter of fact, it's quite likely this will be the first time you're even familiar with it. I'm something that you might call a chocolate sommelier. Okay, so if you're familiar with the term sommelier, you might know that in regard to someone that's knowledgeable about wine, that typically there's someone that is not a winemaker, but they are someone that is knowledgeable about wine. They can conduct tastings and curate pairings. They can consult on menus. They know sort of the processing and the history of wine. I do all those things, but with craft chocolate. Okay, so two things typically occur when I explain that to folks. One, they're surprised to hear that that's a real job. Okay, fair, because it's definitely not one that they cover at career day at school. The second thing that also sometimes happens is that folks tend to feel a bit of retroactive anger at their high school guidance counselor for not having been informed that tasting chocolate for a living was actually a viable career option. Okay, so if you feel that emotion sort of bubbling up inside you right now, please don't dwell in that frustration because it turns out that my professional development is your reward today. I have lots of information to share. The topic at hand is cultural perspectives in chocolate, which is just one of many educational programs we do at Cocoa Beantown. But I always like to start all of our programs the same way, and that is establishing a sort of expectation for you guys. I want you to feel like this is a conversation. I have lots and lots of information to share. Some might even say, those that are in the crowd that know me, that one of my fatal flaws is I can't stop talking about chocolate. But I do want folks to feel like you have a resource here. So if at any point you have questions, please utilize the chat. Again, make this feel like you're not just sitting at a lecture, because I really am very responsive to the fact that sometimes people have things they've always kind of wondered about chocolate, and maybe they weren't sure who to ask or what was the right environment to ask. This is the right environment to ask. Okay, so, but to be fair, since I'm going to let you ask questions, I think it's only fair that I get to ask all of you a question too. And this is also a chance, if you haven't turned on your camera yet, it might also be helpful in this case, but you can also utilize the chat for it. I'd like to know who here in the audience, when it comes to all of the chocolate choices available, who would say that most of the time you are a dark chocolate kind of person? Either show of hands or drop it in the chat. Who is a dark chocolate kind of person? All right, we got some people on the dark side here. Nice to see you, my brothers and sisters. Very good. Who here would say most of the time? Jean is never. Okay, very good. She's also like staking her claim. Who here is more often sort of a milk chocolate kind of person? And this is not a scientific poll. You can raise your hand more than once. If you just can't decide, that's totally fine. Milk chocolate people. Okay. So, all right. So, lastly, of course, who would say most of the time they're more of a white chocolate kind of person? or otherwise has strong feelings about white chocolate? Jean, only at Easter? Okay. All right. Very good. Okay. All right. So I want to explain to you why I asked this question. It's not only to sort of get the gist for where everybody kind of shakes out, but also because I'm a little bit of an amateur chocolate sociologist. Okay. I have asked this question over many groups, over in many different contexts, over many different instances and years and different age ranges and whatnot. And I just got tremendous insight on all of you just by asking that question. Because what we saw was that my dark chocolate folks followed the trend that correlates very understandably with their taste preferential, and that is bold, assertive opinions and bold, assertive flavors. People who like dark chocolate tend to be very assertive about it. They tend to be sort of the snobbiest of the chocoholics, and it takes one to know one. I say that with, full awareness, self-awareness. But dark chocolate is considered to be the healthiest kind of chocolate, so it gives people who like dark chocolate, a little bit of a sense of, oh, look, I'm a real chocoholic because I eat it for health reasons. Wink, wink. Right, right. That's why we all eat the dark stuff. Everyone's nodding with me, right? Meanwhile, the milk chocolate people, they're so much sweeter, right? Because they don't have to put math on their chocolate bar labels. They are a little more self-assured in that they don't have to be as bold and brash about their opinions. And they kind of, are snickering at the dark chocolate folks. Meanwhile, my white chocolate lovers tend to be relegated to the corner of the chocoholic tent. And they're kind of huddled together going, don't tell anyone we're here. They don't even think we belong in the chocoholic tent. And that's not fair, because how often have folks heard, anyone here, have you heard that white chocolate is not really chocolate? How many people have heard that just at least once in your life? Actually, you should all raise your hand because I just said it. So technically, you've heard it at least once in your life now, right? Okay, very good. So, how about this? If nothing else through this program, I promise you that if chocolate comes up on Jeopardy as a category, that I'm going to help you clean up, because I want you to know all these chocolate facts cold. And the number one thing that sort of a chocolate sommelier can do is sort of myth bust in the chocolate world, because there are a ton of myths that exist in the chocolate world. And this is the number one that we come up against, that white chocolate's not really chocolate. So let me give you the real answer straight. The real answer is white chocolate can really be chocolate if it's made properly. And that means it has to be made with this stuff. Okay. So what I'm holding up to the camera is a chunk of cocoa butter. Okay. This is the good natural fat that's in the cocoa bean. And when this gets put in when the bean gets put in a hydraulic press, this will come out as a liquid. It actually looks remarkably like sort of that faux movie theater butter at the pump for popcorn when it's melted. That's not why it's called cocoa butter, but that interestingly, that's what it looks like. So this stuff should be the primary ingredient in white chocolate. If it's made properly, this is the good stuff. This is the stuff that melts at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. It's very pleasant mouthfeel, has a clean, creamy melt, is not waxy or oily. But unfortunately, there's a ton of white chocolate that exists in the world that is not made with that good, delicious stuff. And I wish I had smell-o-vision so that holding it up, you guys could smell it, because then you would get a little hint of cocoa butter smell there. I'm sure Zoom is working on smell-o-vision. We're going to get it any day now. But the idea with cocoa butter being the primary ingredient in white chocolate is that good natural fat is going to deliver a creamy mouthfeel, and there's going to be a subtlety of flavor. There's flavor added that comes from the sugar, the sweetener that's in there. There's going to be milk powder as well. A lot of white chocolate bars have inclusions, things that are added for flavor or texture, like fruits or nuts. But I want to show you something that I promise you is going to change the way you look at chocolate labels from this moment on. Okay. The FDA actually regulates lots of things. And we can't stop hearing about them for some reason for the past 5 years. But they are the official arbiters of sort of food labeling standards in the United States. And for chocolate, they've set a minimum. If there's not 6% cocoa butter in something, you can't call something chocolate. You can do other things that are really sneaky, like add a Y to the word chocolate, and now it's chocolatey. And guess what? There's no regulation about what's chocolatey. And people think it sounds cute and buy products that are chocolatey and don't understand what it's actually telling you. What it's telling you is it's not really chocolate. Then there are other companies that have the tremendous asset of having such name brand recognition that in your mind, you see their brand name and your brain automatically goes, that means chocolate. And I'm going to show you an example of this because when I hold up the following product to the camera, we're going to have like a little contest. As soon as you identify the word chocolate on the label, please sort of raise your hand or buzz in. Okay, ready? Go. Come on, guys. Where's the word chocolate? Can't find it, can you? Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't a chocolate bar. The word chocolate does not appear anywhere on this label because these guys know that if you see their name, they can sell you products that actually aren't chocolate. And they can get around that FDA issue because they've spent so much money getting everyone convinced that everything they do is the best American chocolate that we can get. But that is not the case. And it doesn't mean you can't like this product. If you have nostalgic childhood memories of this, I don't want to yuck your yum, but I want you to understand what it is and know that there is other chocolate out there that is made differently with more authentic ingredients that you will give you a different experience. Okay. So keep that in mind when you shop for chocolate products. Be aware, read labels carefully, and understand what you're buying, and don't leave it up to some big company to decide for you what is actually what you're looking for or what is going to give you the most enjoyment. Okay. So, with all that being said, I think if we're going to talk about cultural perspectives in chocolate, we have to start at home, right? So in America, we have kind of a odd trajectory over the course of our history with chocolate because today I would say there's definitely a huge divide in terms of what is sort of the mainstream understanding of chocolate as opposed to the more specialized sort of gourmand understanding of chocolate. And correlating to that, there's such a great divide in products, but it wasn't always the case. If we actually go back, way, way back to the very beginning of this country, chocolate was first enjoyed not only in America, but in most of the world for most of our culinary history as a beverage. Okay. And so in colonial America, that was how most people were enjoying it. In Boston, we actually were home to the very first drinking chocolate house. That was a tradition that started in Europe. So, do we have any coffee drinkers in the audience? Anyone that's like really into their coffee? Oh, I see some hands that went right up. Yeah. Okay. So, for those folks that really enjoy coffee, you have probably been to a coffee house at some point, probably many times in your life, right? And what is a coffee house? It's a place where you can go and get any number of different types of coffee drinks. You can try them in different styles. They can get prepared different ways. You can probably have them with different snacks on the side. There's also probably a seating area where you can sit with friends, discuss things, meet your neighbors, all sorts of things. Take that concept and just switch out all the coffee beverages for drinking chocolate beverages. And you have the idea of a drinking chocolate house. This was a social custom that started in Europe. And so when it came over to the States, Boston was actually the very first city to have one. And it was actually owned by women, which was very unusual for the time. Women weren't often business owners. But prior to that being established stateside, it actually was something that was somewhat exclusionary at the beginning part of its inception in Europe, because the original chocolate houses in Europe wouldn't even let women in as guests. And I think, if nothing else, it's recognition that the guys didn't want to share their chocolate because they knew we would probably not let them have any. Maybe. So the saucer, actually, if you have an antique tea set, saucers, come with the cups. The saucer was actually invented first for drinking chocolate purposes. It was not originally invented for tea service. The reason why it was so important for drinking chocolate was because women, when they were allowed to come to the drinking chocolate houses, they're wearing lovely gowns. Us ladies would have our, gowns with our petticoats and lots of layers. And laundry was not, there were no shout sticks or spray and wash or any of these, easier to clean things. And you only had so many outfits to start with. So if you dribbled chocolate down your cup onto your gown, it could cause quite an issue. So you needed something to catch those little dribbles. So the saucer became really important for that. But also the vessel that served the drinking chocolate was super unique. And I actually have one to show you folks right here. Okay. So this is an antique drinking chocolate vessel. Okay. And it's very different than a tea kettle, as you can tell, because if everyone remembers the I'm a Little Teapot song, right? I'm a little teapot, short and stout, right? This is not short. It's quite tall. It's longer than my face. And it has a bulbous bottom, but it's not overall squat. Okay. So that's part of how you identify a drinking chocolate pot. The other way you also identify it is notice the location of the spout. Okay. It's right here aligned across the top, and it's not coming from the bottom like a coffee pot would, or where a tea kettle would have their spout. Okay. Why is that important, and why does that actually help you identify what a drinking chocolate pot looks like? So when drinking chocolate was made, it was whisked. There was something either like a molinillo or sort of there's a French word that I'm blanking on that was used to whisk the chocolate. And that's part of why you needed so much height in your vessel too, so that you had room to do it, and the bottom part would be more bulbous. But that would create foam that would be on the top of the liquid. And so the foam was quite delicious, and it added a textural element to your beverage enjoyment. So when people poured out the chocolate, if the spout was aligned with the top, a little bit of foam would go into everyone's cup. Okay. So the reason why I point this out is because these you can find in surprising areas, even though very few people in modern times are aware that houses used to have 3 different service sets if they could afford it. It was not uncommon at all to have a full coffee service, a full tea service, and a full chocolate service set. I have a small collection that I've gotten at estate sales, and most of the time people think that they are weird coffee pots, or they'll mislabel them as teapots, but they're actually chocolate pots. And it's a reflection of the fact that drinking chocolate was just as customary for adults as drinking coffee or tea. As a matter of fact, we had records in a letter dated from November 27th, 1785, from Thomas Jefferson writing to John Adams. He said, "The superiority of chocolate, both for health and nourishment, will soon give it the same preference over tea and coffee in America, which it has in Spain." So they believed that this new country they were forming was going to become a nation of drinking chocolate lovers, more so than coffee and tea. What happened? Why is it now that we're adults, we rarely have chocolate in beverage form? It seems as a kid, we have chocolate milk at lunch and Nesquik and hot cocoa when we come in from sledding. But at some point, you become an adult, and then, chocolate milk at lunch around the boardroom doesn't seem as acceptable. And we don't have chocolate houses anymore. We have coffee houses and tea houses. But this idea that drinking chocolate was also as the reference to how it was being perceived in Spain. Europe in general had really grabbed a hold of this custom of having chocolate as a beverage regularly. The traditions throughout Europe, from this cultural perspective of enjoying chocolate, each sort of country had its own sort of spin on the chocolate beverage. So we have examples of, like in Austria, they would add egg yolk to the drink mixture to froth it more and to add thickness to it. Okay. In Germany and Belgium, they would always make it with steamed milk, as opposed to some other countries might use water or cream. And then even in Spain, it was not served on its own. If you've ever had churros with drinking chocolate, you know that that drinking chocolate gets made extra thick and is spiced. And then it's really more of a sort of a condiment for the churros. Although I would tell you, always make sure even if you run out of churros, drink that chocolate, whatever's left, because it's going to be delicious. Um, Even in places as far as the Philippines had customs where they would have a drinking chocolate, usually with breakfast, and it would be served with rice cakes and mango. So you have all of these localized cultures that are contributing to this beverage, this chocolate beverage, by adding sort of their own little food culture flavors to them, or accoutrement, or what have you. When it comes to a lot of the European countries, there is a lot shared, certain perspectives, but we can't talk about cultural perspectives in chocolate without acknowledging the significant weight of the Swiss. So if anyone has ever come to any sort of chocolate event and discussed with people, not necessarily a Cocoa Beantown event, but then Switzerland is a name that is often on the tongues of people who appreciate chocolate, because there's this sort of unspoken and then spoken idea that the Swiss make the best chocolate, or you have to go to Switzerland to get the best chocolate, or Switzerland makes all the chocolate, which is obviously not a correct and very hyperbolized sort of perspective or understanding of things. But the Swiss do have one thing that they can rightly claim and accurately claim, and that is they, in modern times, are the country with the highest concentration of chocolate consumers in mass. Okay. They regularly top the list of countries that consume the most chocolate outright. Does anyone want to take a guess as to what the average Swiss person eats in pounds of chocolate per year? Throw it in the chat. Just throw out numbers. What do you think the average Swiss person, how many pounds of chocolate per year do you think folks are eating? 300. Whoa. 5. Okay. It's quite a range we covered there. 10. Okay. Any other guesses? Should we do Price is Right rules? Don't go whoever's closest without going over. Change 5 to 50. Oh, okay. Okay. Very good. All right. So no one quite got it, but that's okay, because we're just playing around. But it still might be surprising to you folks. It's 26 pounds of chocolate a year. Oh, Peter, very good at the buzzard. 26 pounds per year. Okay, so that's about half a pound a week. The idea of that, to put that into perspective, the average American is not even close. The average American's only eating about 11 pounds of chocolate a year. Okay, we're not even in the top 10 of chocolate consuming countries. So, if nothing else, I know I'm doing my duty, but consider it your patriotic duty to up the chocolate average. I think this is a platform everyone can get behind. I don't know why no candidate has run on it before, but to also put it further into perspective, because a lot of times Americans think, oh, well, we have that hot dog eating contest and we're big eaters, we have the cheesecake factory portions and all that sort of thing. Why aren't we eating the most chocolate? Well, we're eating other things. For example, the average American eats 25 pounds of pizza a year. So if you just switch out your pizza for your chocolate, we'll have a running shot at taking the lead from the Swiss. But what's interesting about the Swiss perspective on chocolate is that they're one of the few European countries that never had a colony in a cacao producing area. Okay, so that means that all of their sort of love and admiration for chocolate came out of their honest adoption of it into their food culture. And it makes sense that a lot of sort of chocolate recipes and culinary techniques came from it. They're the food culture that developed conching or conking. The idea that Lindt chocolate, Rudolf Lindt, developed the process of conching his chocolate from an accident. He actually left chocolate processing in the machine for too long and left it. He went to a party and forgot about it. And then to conch your chocolate, it makes all the particles get really tight and even and smooth and makes really smooth chocolate. The Swiss are also the folks that develop things like different versions of pralines and different things like gianduja, which is the inspiration for Nutella, that sort of hazelnut chocolate blend together. They also invented the champagne truffle. I mean, the idea that someone said, let's take champagne and put it in the center of a truffle. I think every food culture is grateful that that was something that came to someone's mind. Um, with the Swiss also having easy access to really great dairy. If you've ever been lucky enough to visit that part of the world, they have those beautiful rolling pastoral hills and mountains that make great areas for grazing cattle. And the access to the clean, fresh dairy also helped make it easier for them to develop a really consistent sort of methodology for creating milk chocolate, which, as we established, a few of you in the audience are really big fans of milk chocolate. So it's something that makes sense as to why that particular country sort of adopted that so easily. Most of Europe is pretty revered in terms of their chocolate sort of contributions. Obviously, France is another country that has contributed a lot, not only in chocolatier work and chocolate making, but also just the idea of incorporating it into other foods, baked goods and whatnot. The French, as far as I know, are the only food culture that has three distinct terms for bakeries: boulangerie, patisserie, and viennoiserie, and each one has this separate, distinct meaning. Patisserie is a place where you can find things that have like cake goods and little sort of cookies and petit fours and whatnot, whereas a boulangerie is something that uses yeast items. So breads can be found at a boulangerie, and a viennoiserie is actually something that has to be officially licensed by the French government, as in you've been trained in the art of Viennese pastry arts. So all of these places can utilize chocolate in different ways to make things like pain au chocolat or chocolatines, pain suisse, chocolate cakes and ganaches and things like that. How did Europe come to incorporate chocolate into their culture? Well, we have to trace that back to when the Spanish conquistadors came over to Latin America, because that's where the birthplace of cacao actually originated. When we talk about where chocolate comes from, it's a complicated tale, and it's something that not everyone has a full understanding of that, and it's not anyone's fault in particular that here or anyone that we can directly point fingers at, aside from the way that our modern food is made and industrialized and the way that it's marketed, that large companies really try to obfuscate information and make it so that you as a consumer don't have a clear understanding of where food is exactly coming from. With that being the case, when it comes to something as global as chocolate, you have this sort of issue where you have something that's based on an agricultural crop, but it has to go through tons of processes in order to become chocolate. And so, with that being the case, and with it being an agricultural crop that can only grow in a certain area, cacao needs to grow in hot, humid weather. So it could grow today in Boston, but consistently it would need to be in tropical or equatorial zones. So 20 degrees north of the equator to 20 degrees south. But anywhere within there is fair game. It just so happens that from a botanical history perspective, we know that the origination of the cacao plant, the aroma cacao, is coming from the Amazon River area, most likely in Peru, which just so happens to be a place that I was in a little over a week ago. And so I am also sharing this program with you with having really fresh perspective on sort of the history of chocolate and where it comes from, also from an indigenous culture perspective. While we were in Peru, we actually got to visit a place called Monte Grande that dates back to 3000 BCE. That's a timeline. I don't know about you folks, but my brain can't even fully comprehend the expanse of that timeline. It's so tremendous. But the Mayo Chinchipe people, they found evidence of cocoa cultivation dating back almost 6,000 years. So it's predating anything that was found in Mexico, which is where some people had originally thought that cacao was coming from or first being domesticated. But this sort of archaeological site really seemed to uncover the fact that it's entirely likely that this is where it's actually coming from. The idea that those peoples would be using it also as a beverage, but not exactly in the form of chocolate. They were using cacao in ceremonial, probably drink and beverages, because cacao is actually a fruit. And to give you an idea, this is actually a cacao pod. Okay. It's been dried. It was hollowed out, so there's no beans in it, and it was painted and varnished. When they all dry, they all turn a very dark brown color, but when they're fresh, they can be any number of colors, from orange to bright red to green to almost a purplish red to even sort of mottled, sort of speckly orange, red, yellow. But this is what the whole fruit looks like. So if you were to crack one open, you would have seeds, which are the beans that are covered in a fruity pulp that tastes a lot like lychee fruit. If anyone's ever had lychee fruit or lychee juice, I see some folks nodding. If you can recall that flavor, you can think of something very close to what that fruit pulp tastes like. And so those indigenous people, when they were having the beverage, they were probably having the juice from that. Maybe later is when they started to process the beans and grind them down. We know that eventually sort of the Mayans and mostly the Mayans would be grinding the beans and then adding chilies to it. So not sweetening it, adding spice, a heat spice to it. And it was when the Spanish conquistadors got a hold of them and they brought them back, those beans back to Europe. It was actually the Spanish monks that had the idea to take that bitter, sort of temper the bitter quality of the beans and add sugar to it in order to make a beverage that was more palatable. And that's what got us on the path of sort of our whole cultural understanding today is that, we think of chocolate almost exclusively as being a sweet item, but those beans are bitter. They don't have a natural sweetness to them. It's actually the fruit part. And Peter in the audience because he joined us on the trip, he actually has, if folks can see, he's holding up on Peter Carlson's camera. Oh, there you go. Thanks, Sarah. So there you guys go. You can see that's what the beans look like. They're a little dried at this point, but yeah, that's what they look like. So thank you for that. You make an excellent Vanna White, Peter. I appreciate it. So the idea of having beverages that be the first way that any people really enjoyed chocolate really goes back as far as the timeline could possibly go in chocolate. So it makes sense that this was how most of the history of people across the planet enjoyed chocolate. We even have other cases of other countries, like a lot of island countries or Caribbean countries, like Jamaica, where they'll have cocoa tea. So it's not like a drinking chocolate, but they're steeping the husks or the shells or even the nibs to make a tea out of it. Because recall also that people in these areas, because it's so hot and humid, they're not going to want to make something that can't be stable in that sort of weather. So tea is going to be sort of the easiest way to do that. Now, to take a little detour, a country that I feel is always worth mentioning when we talk about sort of unique perspectives in chocolate culture is another island country, but it's the island country of Japan. Okay. Now, Japan is not a country that most folks are going to think of chocolate quite readily, but it has a very interesting perspective, I think, in chocolate in terms of how they have adopted it into their culture. And probably the thing, if anyone's aware of anything in regards to the intersection of Japan and chocolate, it's the idea of Japanese Kit Kats. I'm curious, has anyone here ever had a Japanese Kit Kat? Usually they're like green tea flavored or something like that. No one? Okay. Well, you can occasionally find them at Asian grocery stores, or you can buy them online and get them shipped. There are a lot of sort of Japanese snack box subscription companies now that will do it. Oh, and I just saw Jean's question. Is any culture still using the fruit for juice? Yeah, actually, there's companies now that are making bottled beverages. There's a company called Blue Stripes that's making bottled beverages. They're based out of New York, and they sell their products in Whole Foods, and they have cacao juice beverages. And in Peru, we all got to try some fermented cacao juice wine that was quite excellent too. Couldn't bring any back, unfortunately. But yeah, it's still around. And I think if more people get interested in it and ask about things, then more companies will diversify the way they're utilizing cacao to make products in general too. So good question. As far as the Japanese Kit Kats go, yeah, Ocean State and Bloomfield has had them. They can pop up in odd places, but it's a very interesting tale of sort of the way Japanese folks adopt food into their culture when it's not something that they came up with. Okay. So green tea is the most common flavor, but I was lucky to travel to Japan in 2016, and I kind of went on a hunt for all the odd Kit Kat flavors I could find just to say, okay, I tried as many different ones. So here's an example of one. Sakura matcha is one. So it's cherry blossom, that's sakura. And then matcha is the green tea. Strawberry. Okay. Champagne and raspberry. All right. Sounds pretty good, right? This was the strangest one. Butter. That was not a good one. I'll tell you. That one I did not like so much. Some other ones too. We had there was pumpkin pudding because I went in October. Um, there's also, let's see, sparkling wine flavor and sake too. And many, 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 many others. As a matter of fact, there are towns that have their own special dedicated Kit Kat flavor. There are historical sites where you can only get a certain Kit Kat flavor, and outside of their original factory, Japan has the only other Kit Kat factory in the world on the island. And how this happened that they so embraced a candy that was not a Japanese company was that the name Kit Kat, when it's pronounced in Japanese, the words actually end up sounding very similar to the words that you would use to express saying good luck to someone. So parents started slipping Kit Kats into their kids' lunch boxes on exam day, or teachers would hand them out on exam day as well. Professors in college would give them out to their students. And when Kit Kat learned of this, they smartly said, well, let's lean into this happy accident. And they started marketing special Kit Kats. So what you find in Japanese Kit Kats is not only that they have so many more flavor options than we do, but they put blank spaces on their wrappers. Okay. Because they know that people are giving these and wanting to write notes to people. That's how customary it is, that's become the tradition of how you share Kit Kat in Japan. They even have Kit Kat cafes where you can get beverages that are inspired by the different flavors, and they even sell a special couverture Kit Kat that is a higher quality chocolate, and you can only buy 3 per day at the cafes because there's only so many allotted to the store. I tried to get my hands on. They apparently sold they planted some cacao on one of the southern islands of Japan, because Japan is hundreds of islands, and they tried to grow some cacao and then make a cacao or a Japanese cacao origin Kit Kat. They didn't make very many of them. These are the things that a chocolate sommelier tries to do in order to, get the fully rounded picture of chocolate exploration. But also worth mentioning in terms of sort of the funny ways that chocolate traditions have been adopted in Japan is to speak on Valentine's Day. Okay. Now, Valentine's Day, obviously in the United States, is a very big deal in terms of how it's been adopted. Women account for 75% of chocolate sales most of the year on any given year. But on February 14th, men account for 75% of the $1 billion in chocolate sales. And they do occur on February 14th. I've worked in chocolate stores on Valentine's Day, and those sales occur between 5 and 7 p.m. on February 14th. I can tell you that much. However, in Japan, Valentine's Day chocolate is a little different, because what happens is that the women are actually buying chocolate for the men on Valentine's Day. All right. Women are not receiving gifts on Valentine's Day. It is something that they also encourage people to buy for all the men in their life, not just romantic partners. So you would buy for your boyfriend, significant other, husband, but also your father, your son, your nephew, your neighbor, your coworker. But also, it is customary that if you've ever had a crush on someone, or you want to let someone know that you think they're kind of cute, it's also the day you take the opportunity to give them a hint. So if a lady likes someone and she wants to let him know, she'll buy him some really good chocolate and give it to him on Valentine's Day. Now, here's where things get really tricky, because a month later, so March 14th, they celebrate a whole separate holiday called White Day. And that is the day where men finally return the favor to ladies. All right. So White Day is called White Day because all the gifts are supposed to be white. So it's everything from marshmallows and white chocolate to pearls or lingerie. Champagne, I guess, would count too. But the returned gifts to, the reciprocal lady, you're supposed to be gifting back whoever gifted you on February 14th. You're supposed to equate that with sort of your response to their affection. So, husband and wife should get pretty equal value items, by the time the whole exchange is done. But in the case of a lady who's trying to sort of express her love or catch the eye of someone, if he's just not that into you, he's going to give you a marshmallow. So he's going to say, not in words, but I'm sorry, I'm just not feeling it. Here's like your little, nothing of a gift. But if he's into it and he's like, hey, let's do this, then he'll get you like a really great, gift box of white chocolate or something like that. And that will be the way that you are informed. Yeah, I think you're pretty cute too. And like, let's give it a shot. So, how this developed, because this is only celebrated in Japan, it all came down to what they believe was a misprint on a chocolate ad from an American company that got mistranslated, talking about how to celebrate Valentine's Day in the 1800s. And it somehow got confused in the translation, and this whole separate holiday and this whole separate tradition developed, and it continues to this day. So if you do ever travel to Japan on February 14th or March 14th, you will find that the chocolate companies are out there sort of promoting their products, and especially with March 14th, a special emphasis on white chocolate, white candies, like I said, marshmallows, all those sorts of things, ice cream too. It's a really interesting sort of thing, and again, sort of happened out of this misunderstanding. So we've covered a lot of different perspectives around the world, but before we open it up to questions, I wanted to also give you guys some tips and tricks that I've learned in terms of when I travel. I, first of all, consider the world to be one big giant chocolate scavenger hunt. Folks will always ask me, how do you find these interesting small little chocolate shops and chocolate makers and chocolatiers? Well, some of them tend to find me. I kind of put the vibe out there. Peter will be nodding in the audience right now, and Debbie. But another thing that I really do encourage folks to do is stop thinking of the candy aisle at CVS and the checkout line at the grocery store as being the one and only place you look for sweets. Okay. There's so much great chocolate in the world, and it really just requires you to sort of have this sort of whimsical, childlike perspective of it's a scavenger hunt. Keep my eyes open, look for it. You never know when there's a new favorite out there. But for folks that when you're traveling, and while this mostly works for domestic travel, I would say in Canada, it's going to apply, certainly places in Europe too. Mostly when you are coming upon those chocolate shops that are selling like bonbons and truffles and filled chocolates, so the chocolatiers of the world. I have 3 questions that I always ask when I go into shops like that I want to give you guys that will automatically, no matter where you are, will give you an insight into the local food culture, even before you've opened a tourism guide or looked for the top Yelp reviewed places or anything like that. Okay, so this is when you find those chocolatier shops that have bonbons and truffles, this is what you want to ask. Okay, first question is very simple. Do you sell more milk or more dark? Okay, if they sell more dark chocolate, it's going to tell you a few things. They might be a little more health conscious in the area. They also might be a little more cosmopolitan. Dark chocolate has been trending more and more over the years lately. And so folks are kind of looking at it as a more sophisticated palate sort of experience. So if the sales reflect that more dark is being made and sold, that's probably what you're going to find in that local food culture. The second question is, what is your most popular piece? Okay, what is the best seller in the shop? Is it something like something classic, like a cherry cordial? Or is it like a coconut haystack, something sort of retro? Or is it something sort of nouveau and culinary, like a basil goat cheese truffle or something like that? And from that answer, again, you'll get insight into, okay, the people in this area are very, traditional. If they're into cherry cordials or coconut haystacks, they probably like simple recipes that have been around a long time. They don't experiment a lot. There's probably not going to be a lot of like fusion cuisine restaurants or anything like that. On the other hand, if they are serving a basil goat cheese truffle, they're going to have innovative, experimental minds in the area and people that are creative and willing to take risks, and a community that embraces that sort of perspective in a business as well. The third question is, do you have a piece that is either a local business specialty or company recipe, or a regional recipe? And when I've asked that question, I've gotten some really interesting local history. An example, I was traveling in Maine years ago, a little town called Waterville. Not much reason to go there at all, I can tell you, but I was driving through and I found a chocolate shop and I went in and I was asking these questions. And when I came upon a piece called a Needham, I got a really interesting story. Now, I'm based in the Boston area. There, you may or may not be aware, there's a town in Massachusetts called Needham, Needham. So I had never seen this piece before in Massachusetts. Why am I now suddenly all the way up in Maine and seeing a Needham chocolate? I thought, oh, maybe they also, because New England shares a lot of town names. There's Concord, Massachusetts, Concord, New Hampshire, stuff like that. But no, as it turns out, the Needham was named for a pastor that was in one of the towns nearby years ago that came to start speaking at a local church, and he became known for giving inordinately long sermons, like hours and hours. This guy would go on and on. And people would come to church having not eaten in the morning before communion and start feeling faint as this guy was going to hour 2, hour 3. So the local chocolate shop wanted to give folks something they could sneak in their pockets to snack on so that they would get a little sustenance while the pastor was going on and on. And what they made was a chocolate covered patty that was made of coconut flakes mixed with potato flakes, because they had a lot of potatoes in Maine and coconuts not so much. So they sort of augmented the coconut with the potato flakes. Now, the potato also added fiber, a little nutrition in there. Obviously, the sugar would help their blood sugar. This was something that when I tried it, honestly, it tastes, the potato is indistinguishable with the coconut. It tastes a lot like a Mounds. But the chocolate was named for the pastor that went on and on and on. And so it was called the Needham chocolate. I got all this just from asking about this piece of chocolate. So chocolate can be a lens that you really learn so much about the world around you. And you can also utilize it as sort of the inspiration for you to go out there and find new adventures and new tastes and new explorations. And I hope that everyone who attended this is coming away with some new ideas about chocolate that you can sort of ruminate on. And I'd love to open the floor for questions. If folks have any, we can unmute you or you can drop them in the chat. I see a question in the chat that I missed earlier from Anna or Anna. Do they have the same consistency with the crackers? What was that in reference to?
That was the Kit Kat.
The Kit Kat. Oh, yeah. So the one thing that's proprietary about Kit Kat is the wafers. And there's a really interesting, it's going back to probably fall of 2017, but it was a huge, huge piece. So I'm sure it's in the archives. But the New York Times did a deep dive, long form piece on the phenomenon of Japanese Kit Kats. And they said that when they sent their reporter to the factory in Japan, they were allowed to see every part of the factory, the manufacturing, except the wafer room, because that is the one thing that is completely proprietary, like the thickness, what exactly goes in it, what the machine looks like, how it's pressed. So you can change all the other parts. You can change the flavors. They even have bakeable Kit Kats in Japan where you like put them in a toaster oven and it kind of makes like a creme brulee Kit Kat. I have not gotten to try those. But yeah, that wafer with that crunch in there at just the right thickness, that sort of splintery, crackery feel is really the key to what is a Kit Kat. So Jean says, is it true that US chocolate candy is sweeter than European? Yes, it is. So we have lower standards than most European countries. You're welcome, Anna. Than most European countries when it comes to what is considered chocolate. As I said, our minimum standard for cocoa butter is like 6%. I think the next nearest minimum standard in a European country is something like 32%. So there's quite a gap, disparity in terms of what we'll consider chocolate and still what, someone else won't. If folks are fans of Nutella, you might know that Nutella has can be made stateside or it can be made in Europe, and there's a difference in the recipe. And the difference is the Nutella in Europe has less corn syrup in it and more cocoa. And so it's more chocolatey flavored and less sort of syrupy sweet. How you know the difference other than like looking on the label and seeing where it was made. If it's made in a glass jar, it's the good Nutella. If it's made in a plastic jar, it's the one made here. Usually gourmet import stores. I have a Greek grocery store near me that actually sells the glass jar Nutella. But yeah, essentially a lot of industrialized chocolate makers have sort of attempted to train and have been successful at training the vast majority of the American palate to think that chocolate is sugar, that it's sugar forward, that it's candy, while most of the rest of the world has an understanding that chocolate is a fine food and it is not sugar forward, it's chocolate. So if you find that you are searching for more chocolate flavor in your chocolate, the answer is to step away from the industrial chocolate. Like I said, stop looking at the candy aisle at the grocery store and look for small chocolate makers. Actually, Peter Carlson in the audience here, he's a chocolate maker in Massachusetts called Right Old School Chocolate. And he makes excellent bean to bar chocolate. In Connecticut, there's one in Avon called Chokaico, Chokaico. We have a bunch in Massachusetts and other places. They're not folks you're going to find advertising on TV, but you might find them at farmers markets. You might find them at craft fairs and whatnot. But also keeping that eye out for small business. How did you find your hairdresser? How did you find your mechanic? Look for small businesses and know that they're doing good work. They just don't have the money to put into advertising, so they're depending on you to seek them out. And you all can follow Cocoa Beantown on Instagram at Cocoa Beantown. We share all these makers all the time because we want to help people get connected to all these wonderful small makers and small businesses.
That'd be a good place. Let me just stop the recording there and we'll switch up our settings.
Okay.
Support small businesses.